Okay, so this video will be covering Ivy Day in the committee room, which we went over in class last week, or last class. So it'll be, as usual, a review of what we covered in class and looking at certain things that we may not have gotten to in detail. And again, try to keep it reasonably short, an hour or less. And we'll be looking at the text directly. There's the PowerPoint that I posted that I'll also be looking at in this video. And as a reminder for our next class, we will, if you have questions, we can do a quick review of Ivy Day in the committee room, but we have no assigned reading for this week. Our class on Monday will be focusing on preparing for the exam, the midterm exam, and particularly looking at what is expected in terms of structure and writing, academic essay, and we can review all the stories because remember, as I've emphasized to you, you are responsible for all the material that we have covered. Right? We're dropping the short story entitled The Lottery. You are not required to read that. There will be no questions concerning that story on the midterm exam. After the exam, we will be going straight to Shakespeare's Macbeth. Okay? So, Ivy Day in the committee room, as we discussed, a bit of a challenging text, can be difficult in many respects because the context is very much rooted in Irish history, Irish culture. So there's a lot of references that we may not be familiar with. We've covered a lot of that in class, and I'm going to go over some of that as well now. But remember, the point I was trying to make is you don't need to be an Irish historian to be able to appreciate what's really going on in this story, right? We know that the Ivy Day is a day commemorating the death of Charles Parnell, an Irish politician who was leading the charge for Irish independence and home rule, who, because of a scandal, an extramarital affair, was, for all intents and purposes, destroyed as a politician because of the emphasis on morality and ethics. He was brought down, tried to hold on to some kind of political hope for the future, but his health deteriorated quite rapidly after the scandal. A scandal and the ousting of him led very much by the Catholic Church, very much splitting Irish public opinion between those who agreed that he should go because of his behavior, those who still wanted him to stay because his presence as a politician, as a leader, as a hero for the Irish cause was huge. So much of what this story is dealing with is the vacuum that occurs with the exit of Parnell. There was no one to come in to replace him. And this led to a time in Irish society, culture, politics, of inertia. Everyone seemed to have lost their motivation without the leader to direct them and to motivate them and to give them purpose. Their lives become routine, and very little gets done. Right? That's much of what the story is dealing with. It's also commentary on the two generations we're seeing, the generation that remembers Parnell, the generation that is, for most part, the men that we're seeing here with their ivy on their lapels, commemorating Parnell, and yet really, for the most part, just doing it out of routine. And that is contrasted with a younger generation. We're introduced at the very start to old Jack's son, right? Through old Jack's description of him, and a very negative portrayal of the son. Very much emphasizing that that generation, the younger generation, without a leader, without purpose, is becoming lost, if you want, a lost generation, prone to drinking, emphasized in the story, and how the older generation is very critical of that. And yet it's also very much a commentary on that older generation that seemingly was unable to find direction after Parnell left. Right? So both generations, while one is criticizing the other, neither are doing anything. We get a very laissez-faire attitude among everyone. We noted as well, in terms of symbols, one of the more important ones that we notice is the symbol, the fire, right? What does that symbolize? We discussed the idea that it symbolizes Parnell, fire, energy, light to see, its diminishment, notably. It also represents and symbolizes not just Parnell the man, more importantly, it symbolizes what Parnell came to represent. So it's not just about the man. Parnell is much larger in this story than just a man. He was the driving force in an extraordinarily emotional and powerful purpose for Irish independence from England. The movement was gaining great steam. Much was being accomplished, and then it all seemed to go away with one man, Parnell, and no one came to replace him. We see this in terms of the politicians that are now in the forefront, right? The people we're meeting are canvassers for Tierney, the politician Tierney, and they are extraordinarily critical of him. He is a politician that has seemingly very little focus. It's all about playing the political game for power and prestige, not for a cause. And that's really the essence here. Without a cause, without a purpose, without a very specific goal, and a leader to galvanize the people towards achieving that goal. Without that leader, very little gets done. So there's quite a commentary on the importance of leadership and what are the qualities that an individual has that makes them a leader. Parnell represents that element of leadership, the hero, if you will, that naturally gains followers. But it's also a commentary on the precariousness of that kind of leadership that leads to people on the verge, if not over the verge, of worshiping that person, elevating that person to a status that is unrealistic, because that person is still just a human being. And if you are putting yourself in a situation where you become dependent on having that other person, that leader, that hero, as the force for change, the force for progress, you're channeling it towards that individual, and that takes it away from from yourself. Without that person there, it exposes that yourself, these men, these characters in our story, can't do it on their own. And that's much of the commentary that the story is making. Is it saying that there's an absolute need for the leader? Is it saying each and every individual should not be dependent on that leader? Because by being dependent, they don't look within themselves to find their own kind of leadership qualities, right? So are they dependent? And what does that say about the individual who needs the other charismatic leader in order to achieve anything? It doesn't answer that question, right? It's exploring this phenomena of the lack of leadership, the lack of the motivating forces to get things done. It is particular to Irish politics and the Irish historical context, but it has that universal quality because it can relate to any situation where people are stagnant until the leader comes to galvanize them. And perhaps what it's commenting on is you shouldn't have to wait for that person to motivate you, that you need to find your own motivation. Look more inward and not be dependent outward. And we see this as well in the story with that younger generation. They have no one to look up to. And importantly, it's a commentary as well on different levels of leadership. And what I mean by that is we see with the younger generation, right, children will often look to their parents as those leaders, look to the parents as the guide as to how to proceed and what to give purpose. But we see that in this story, that is seemingly a failure as well. Old Jack doesn't know what else to do. Is unable to motivate, help, guide his own son, who has become a drunk and is achieving nothing. So the old Jack's son, 19 years old, is not attentive to his father or his father's wishes or purpose, and has nowhere else to turn, and by himself is lost. But of course, that's also a commentary on old Jack. You know, he's not able to motivate his son, right? If he had those qualities that Charles Parnell had, then his son potentially would be more attentive to old Jack. But we see how old Jack talks about his son. You know, he says, if I was younger and he was younger, I'd go back to what I used to do, which is beat him when he misbehaved, right? So there's, you know, commentary that by trying to force someone to believe something, you know, my way or the highway, type of attitude is not the way that you motivate people. Right? You have to have whatever those qualities that Parnell had, whatever qualities some parents do have, where children are given that guidance and motivation and achieve success. We're not having that here. Right? And so it's working on personal levels, father-son relationships, and generational commentary as well, because it's not just old Jack's son, it's also the boy who brings up the beer and is clearly meant to be identified with old Jack's son in terms of the drinking, in terms of indifference, and to some degree a lack of respect for the older generation. Almost as if this younger generation is sitting there saying, you guys are doing nothing. You're sitting around and you're achieving little. So why would I look to you? And if I do look to you, you're giving no guidance. By example, you're not the person who's going to motivate me to do anything. Without you there to help guide and motivate me, and our societal leaders are no longer there. Parnell's gone. The current politicians are shallow at best. It's all about money. It's all about playing the political game. That takes away the trust element, the importance for guidance and leadership that the Catholic Church represented. Big part of Irish history, big part of Irish culture, represented in this story with Father Keon is no longer a force. All right, remember we talked about him. He's wandering, he's lost, he stumbles into the wrong place. And of course we get that symbolism of light and dark, light being the spark that gives direction and motivation, right? Represented by the fire which at the beginning is being stoked by old Jack, but then is reduced to just 2 candles, a much dimmer light, right? And the defrocked priest, mysterious in many ways as to what he is. Is he still a priest? Has he been removed from that position? But overall representing its lack of strength, lack of power. Just the fact that they don't know him, he's compared to he's just an actor, right? And not wanting even the light of the candle to guide him. Very much a commentary that the Catholic Church no longer plays that role of leadership. The politicians no longer play that role of leadership. The parents, Jack in particular, no longer play that role of leadership for this younger generation. They even at one point, as you recall, when they're talking about Tierney, the politician, who they very remember called Tricky Dicky, they very much berate him. Why hasn't he given us our money? And that's all we're here for. We don't care about any cause or anything like that. And at one point they say, doesn't he remember how his father was, who ran a secondhand shop of sorts, and did good within the society, was a simple man, and yet did something that was beneficial to the society. And that's what we're getting at here, right? Is that in itself, if you are giving back to society, is the beginning of having purpose, recognizing the need to be part of that society so that not to achieve something as a society. Recognizing that each individual is part of that society, and perhaps suggesting that each individual, if they were to take responsibility for their own actions and look to themselves for motivation and purpose and direction, would then be less dependent on having somebody come galloping in on their white horse to lead the charge. And part of the commentary is, can things be achieved without that leadership? If it's meant to suggest that you can't be dependent on a leader, you can't be dependent on Charles Parnell, because we all were, and look what happened when he went down, we all went down with him. If we had more confidence in ourselves, more strength, more conviction, not putting it all on the leader, then the cause could have kept going. It's the danger of that kind of dependence on a leader. If something happens to that leader, then is that it? Is it all over? And we certainly get that sense in this story. And we don't have resolution at the end. There's a recognition through the poem of how powerful Parnell is elevated very much by the end of the story. I mean, and certainly I would argue throughout the story, but in that poem, it's clearly indicated that, you know, Parnell has now in death been elevated to a mythological status. The problem there is mythology, while it explores our realities, right? It tackles issues that usually have universal qualities and are very germane to that culture and that society. They're not mythological figures, and the idea of myth is not tangible in that moment. It's symbolic. Where are those people now? If we're just reminiscing about them in the past. Well, I remember what it was like. And you see that in here when they think back to when Parnell was there. And Parnell wouldn't have done this. Parnell would have done this, and so on. But that's living in the past. It does nothing for the present, which then does not bode well for the future. So a lot there. But what I'm trying to point out here in these opening remarks is it's not rooted exclusively in an Irish context. It's applicable to any situation where people turn to leaders for guidance. And it's a commentary on the danger of doing that if the leaders ultimately fail in some manner. Right, so with Parnell, it's a little bit of both a failure on the part of Parnell and the attacks that destroyed him. Right, the attacks couldn't have happened if Parnell hadn't made certain choices, very human choices. Almost as if you are trying to place that hero when they're alive and active on this mythological pedestal and make them into something they're not. Because ultimately, they're just human. If the individual or the society, a group of individuals, becomes so dependent on that leader that in their minds have transformed him into something he's not, so that when he makes human mistakes that we all make, it becomes unacceptable in that person because we've elevated him beyond what we expect from ourselves. Our expectations of the leader are much higher than the expectations we have with ourselves. And the story seems to be commenting and saying, this may not be a good thing. Does that mean rely more on ourselves? Does that mean perhaps don't elevate the leaders to such a high status? But it's also something that is, throughout history, always very much followed a similar pattern. The importance of leaders and heroes to make the individuals within a society motivated, give them purpose, and make them feel better about themselves. We certainly get a sense with these gentlemen, they don't seem like a happy bunch, right? And it's as if they're sitting there waiting, doing nothing to help the situation, just waiting for some magical being to enter in and bring them out of this, consciously or subconsciously. But they're not doing anything themselves. And of course, it's very important in the context of the story that it's on a specific day when they are reminiscing, commemorating what has been lost. The man was lost, Parnell. But the cause, home rule, independence from England, it's still there. But no one's doing anything about it now. The man may die, but the idea shouldn't die with the man or woman, leader, hero. And yet it does. All right. So let's just quickly, all right, we're going to go through, hold on. Take a quick look at the text. I don't want to get you all bogged down in this. And again, we covered much of this. We went over this opening part. Again, the emphasis on the fire, darkness, light, and we see these shadow emerge into the light. We talked about this. Be attentive to this. It's creating an atmosphere and setting a tone for the story right from the beginning. We talked about Mr. O'Connor, the gray-haired young man, all right, so somewhere in between, and his lethargy, rolling the cigarette, unrolling the cigarette, lighting it with, right, the card that he's meant to distribute. I mean, right from the beginning, clearly indicating that there's no motivation here. There's no passion for this. It's a job. It's a job, and it's all about getting paid. It is it has no spirit. It's all materialistic. We talked about Israel. That's what ruins children. Remember, this is when they're talking about his concerns, we get immediately, yes, he said it's hard to know what way to bring up children. Who'd think he'd turn out like that? Bad, right? I sent him to the Christian Brothers. Right? That was one of the places, again, demonstrating that they were always reliant on others to take on these responsibilities. So in terms of the father-son or parents-children theme that's running here, we get here with old Jack, it's like, I sent him to the Christian Brothers. I mean, they're supposed to take care of these things. Well, isn't it also partly, that large part, old Jack's responsibility to give his children guidance, sending them to the Christian Brothers? And if they are exposed to being something less than otherworldly, then they don't have the guidance. It's similar to what happened to Parnell. It's suggested here also happened to the Catholic Church. It no longer has the ability. There's no one, not the church, not the politicians. No one's there anymore to give guidance. The suggestion is it was there. Back in the older generation, we had the politicians, we had Parnell, we had the church, we had leadership within the Catholic Church that we looked up to and revered. It's all gone now. And again, the emphasis here, I'm an old man now. I changed his tune from I take the stick to his back and beat him while I could stand over him, as I've done many times before. Right? But how's that going to be successful? Whenever he gets a job, he drinks it all. Right? So clear, again, commentary on that generation. We talked about the two candlesticks, right? The fire is lit from the two candlesticks, from the fire onto two candlesticks. Not this big roaring fire of energy and drive that certainly was there during Parnell's time. A denuded room came into view, and the fire lost all its cheerful color. All right, remember, when we're looking here to find substantiating evidence to interpretations that we're exploring, here's what we're seeing again, the emphasis on the fire in relation to using the two candlesticks, drawing fire away from the big fire to two smaller fires. And now the fire in general has no cheerful color, right? So again, if we're looking at the fire in relation to Parnell and what Parnell represented, what Parnell achieved as a political leader, it had that cheerful color. And cheerful is, very noticeable word here. We don't see much cheerfulness in this environment here. The fire has lost all its cheerful color, meaning it had the cheerful color in the past. Right? So not only was it giving a generation purpose and direction, that purpose and direction gave them happiness. Commentary there that you need that purpose and direction, however you get it, whether it's through following a leader or perhaps finding it within yourself, you need that in order to be content. Without that, you become like these people. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, right? Again, emphasis, has he paid you yet? That's what matters, not, has he set new policy? Where's our next demonstration? Is he going to confront you know, the oppressive English Parliament, and no, has he paid us? We don't care about what he stands for. We're talking about tyranny now. He's just tricky Dicky. And we're just doing this for the money, not for the cause. Again, we talked about this tricky Dicky tyranny. Again, you have to, you know, it's just little things when the room falls into silence. It's a very heavy atmosphere. Note, it's all taking place in this committee room. It's important with the committee room as well, because it was in the committee rooms that Parnell would give his speeches and galvanize the people. His presence would excite in these very rooms like this particular room, the committee room. And we see, of course, that there's nothing like that going on now. Right, and again, with tricky Dicky Tierney, oh, he's as tricky as they make him, said Henchley. He hasn't got those little pig's eyes for nothing. Now, this is the person that they are advocating for as their political leader. Of course, we're meant to see that in contrast to the mythological glorification, certainly in the final poem, of Parnell. And again, always remember, this is all taking place on Ivy Day, October 6th. A day to celebrate Parnell. Even those who agreed with taking him down on moral and ethical issues because of his behavior are still now willing to acknowledge at least the impact he had. So it was more sad that he had to come down, but again, inability to reconcile such behavior as that and allowing him to maintain his position of power and leadership. There's a whole commentary there. I mean, if you're attentive to the politics of our own day, it's the same thing. We have people in leadership roles who can come crashing down so quickly because of human mistakes, human behavior, especially when it is deemed immoral, unethical. That's enough to forget about everything that they've done that is positive as a politician, as a leader. All that gets tossed away because of the moral and ethical behavior. And we're being asked to question that and to reflect on that. Should that be the case? It's not giving us an answer, right? And that's for all of us to contemplate. Can I forgive these moral and ethical missteps, if you will? Not criminal. Important to remember that. We're not talking about, Parnell wasn't brought down because of criminal activity. It's not that he was taking bribes, all right? It was moral and ethical behavior. Of course, that's a big reason why the church became involved. And it's important to remember that distinction. It's pretty much, I would argue, I would suggest, an easier issue if the leader is guilty of criminal behavior. That's different. Usually the moral and ethical issues, well, often they can lead to criminal behavior, but in the case of Parnell, because it was an extramarital affair, it's usually a kind of weakness. Again, how familiar you are with, fairly recent politics in North America, the United States, but the whole thing with Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky and all this. So how do we assess the overall qualities of a leader when we have to recognize as human beings there's all these really powerful, especially if they're a powerful, charismatic leader, but they're still human and therefore susceptible to human foils and human behavior at times, which is often deemed to be immoral and unethical. Okay, important to remember that distinction. It wasn't criminal. It was deemed to be immoral and unethical. Now the politicians have little pig's eyes. And this is the bit here as well where they talk about, I suppose, they're talking about tyranny, I suppose he forgets the time his little old father kept the hand-me-down shop in Mary's Lane. So again, we're seeing a generational thing, right? His father, a hand-me-down shop on Mary's Lane. And men used to go in on Sunday morning before the houses were open to buy waistcoats or trousers, moya. But Tricky Dicky's little old father always had a tricky little black bottle up in a corner. Do you mind now? That's that. That's where he first saw the light. So here again, for Tierney, they're talking about Tierney's father, who had this, wasn't a politician or anything like that, but that the impact of the father here, they're suggesting, paved the way for Tricky Dicky Tierney, suggesting that, and we don't have a distinct timeline here, but that Parnell's falling led to others falling. Old Jack, right, dependent on the Christian Brothers beating his son. Is it any wonder that his son turned out the way he did? When the Christian Brothers no longer have impact, the politicians no longer have impact. Is that the same case here with Tierney? Again, this also breeds suspicion, distrust, right? And that, to tell you my private and candid opinion, and I think he's a man from the other camp. He's a spy of Colgan's, right? We talked about this in class. But it's also important to remember that once you take away that leadership, that beacon of light that everyone gravitates to, once that's taken away, everyone comes down here and they're all looking around. Where do we go? What do we do? We're not moving. We're stagnant. And then, well, why is that? What are you up to? What are you up to? People become suspicious. There's nothing, it's just a mingling of depressed, suppressed individuals with no direction. If you don't have a strong belief in something, if you are wishy-washy on issues, you're suspicious that everyone else might be as well. So the whole system starts to crumble, including individuals' relationship with each other, where this distrust builds because there's no direction and purpose. We have here, there was a knock at the door. Again, it's worth looking at this again. A person resembling a poor clergyman or a poor actor. Important, I know we touched on this and just want to emphasize it again, that it's as if it's interchangeable. A poor clergyman or a poor actor. Clergymen, priests, etc., people of in the hierarchy of religion are being compared with just actors. Don't believe them. They're acting. There's that suspicion again. We used to believe them. We used to believe they spoke truth to power. Now we're saying, yeah, it was all an act. The Catholic Church, the commentary here is suggesting that, yes, we can't trust them anymore because they were all acting, manipulating. And even taking it further, remember, he walks into the wrong place. He's looking for someone and he's not there. He's round at the Black Eagle. But won't you come in and sit down a minute? They're asking him. It's their reaching out. Henchy, of course, we're always a little suspicious about what Henchy's up to. Won't you come sit down a minute? And no, thank you. It was just a little business matter, said Father Keon. So again, demonstrating for us that even the church, which now doesn't seem to have an identity, we don't know who Father Keon is, and he is there to represent and symbolize the church, doesn't really have, they don't know, is he still a priest or isn't he? Is he just an actor? Diminishing that status that role played so prominently when they were allied with Parnell, and then when they led the charge to bring Parnell down, and now reduced to a lack of any kind of certainty in terms of identity and purpose, except for it's a business matter. Just like they're all waiting to be paid, right? Everything is reduced to materialistic gratification. In this case, even more prominently emphasized to us because what we associate with the priesthood and religion and theology is spiritual gratification. It's reduced now to just, it's a business matter. Where is that? And that is part of the equation here when we're talking about it, insofar as that kind of purpose, motivation, gravitation towards that leader often is not rooted in necessarily analytic, pragmatic issues. Becomes something more than that. Right? When you get to the point, like, I'm willing to die for this. And that was the fervor that was involved with this movement and desire for independence from England. It eventually would pan out, after this story takes place, in people dying for this cause. The Easter Rising of 1916, and ultimately to independence in 1922. Very much people, they did get it back in for the Irish, but later, after this story takes place and after the story was written. But it's not here now. This is encapsulating a moment when it wasn't there. And that kind of willing to die for something, willing to die for the leader, willing to die for the cause that the leader represents, that goes, well beyond just everyday attitudes towards living. Right? Everyday attitudes towards living is, I need money, I got to put food on the table, and it's the world we're seeing here. That other thing involves a certain spiritual sense, a certain almost irrational, are you willing to die for this? That can be argued, really? And the answer, when people are caught up in a cause that means so much to them, yes, willing to die, I'm willing to die for my country. Right? We hear this. Well, that's an extraordinarily powerful sensibility for an individual to have. And there seems to be a suggestion here that it's needed, if not to the extent that you're willing to die for it, but at least that you believe in it. Believe in something. No one here seems to believe in anything. No one seems to care, except for their money and their beer. That's all that's left here in this void after the demise of Parnell. And that's very much what I would argue the story is about, and emphasized in so many ways, very much so with Father Keon, right? He retreated from the doorway, seizing one of the candlesticks, went to the door to light him downstairs. Oh, don't trouble, I beg. No, but the stairs is so dark. No, no, I can see, thank you indeed. Are you right now? All right, thanks, thanks. And he goes down the stairs into the dark. Away from the light, away from the fire. That's the story. That's where the church goes in this story. All right. Let's try to, I think we're going on that hour already. But again, the emphasis here, and we can talk about it again in class when we review this, is that if you take that drive and desire, that, for want of another word, that spiritual of some sort, that non-pragmatic sense of, I gotta have this, I believe in this, I'm willing to fight for this, I'm willing to die for this. And again, even if it's not to the point you're willing to die for something, but to believe in something. And the passion, the emotions that stirs up, that's what's gone here. That's what's gone. And we see it with the younger generation. They're just drinking. We see it with the boy who brings up the beer. He's just so nonchalant. He's almost disrespectful. You got any beer bottles for me? And oh, okay, thanks for the. And even how they say it, right here. Would you like a drink, boy? Right. So again, emphasizing that, you know, this type of lifestyle. What age are you? 17. As the old man said nothing further, the boy took the bottle and said, "Here's my best respects, sir." He says that once he's got the bottle in his hand. Drank the contents, put the bottle back on the table, wiped his mouth with his sleeve. Then he took up the corkscrew and went out of the door, sideways, muttering some form of salutation. It's muttering. No, wow, that was really, thank you very much. Appreciate that you gave me a drink. Just taking things for granted. Nothing really matters here. And again, reminder, because we covered this in class, we come back to the fire. The fire represents all that other stuff, that stuff with the passion. That's, I think, a key word here. Where is the passion? There is no more passion. Parnell ignited passion. Certainly the Catholic Church, as so many religions, when they're effective, incite passion. And without that passion for something, what are we? We're just sitting here slowly rolling our cigarettes, waiting for the day to continue. What kind of a life is that? The story seems to be asking that. What kind of a life is this? We're here in the middle of a political election. This is when people should get extraordinarily passionate, because these are the people that are going to change our world through policies and whatnot. And there's still the issue of being under British rule in Ireland. We see that it's emphasized to us in their discussions about the king coming and whether that's right or whether that's wrong. We covered that in class. The issues are all still there, but no one seems to care anymore. No one's got the passion for it anymore, because Parnell's not there. Is that enough of a reason for all that to go away? Because of one man, one leader, the demise of one leader? Of course, yes, it branches out to the demise of the Catholic Church as well in this story. But again, commentary on if we are dependent for our passions and our beliefs on something else or someone else. If they fail or they let us down, then we've got nothing left in the tank. That's sad. Fire's reduced to opening up beer bottles. Flames of passion, belief, and purpose. Again, the discussion of the king coming with the pucks, sporadically thrown in here. That's the bottles opening, being opened by this, the trick of they don't have the opener. Can't get the cork out. Oh, I got a trick. The fire represents Parnell and the passion that Parnell had, and the purpose and the belief that he came to represent. If the fire represents him and those beliefs, in this story, it's reduced to being just a beer bottle opener. That's the sorry and sad state of affairs. Another one, puck. And then we went through this. They come back to, Hines is the one who seems to be, remember, Hines is the one who talks about social justice and whatnot. Hines is the only one here who seems to still have a little bit of the passion and belief left, but not enough, seemingly. Maybe there's a suggestion that, he could be the one. He's the one who wrote the poem. And it's all here. We talked about it. I read through this, right? The kiss betrayed him. Right? Biblical reference to Judas. The fawning priests, no friend of his. They're talking about Parnell. And the priest's the one to bring him down. Suggestion of why now Father Keon is down in the dark. Notice going down the stairs into the dark. Down, not up, right? The day that brings us freedom's reign, and on that day may Erin well pledge in the cup she lifts to joy one grief. The memory of Parnell. Because that's all that's left. And memories can only take you so far. And note again how they react when it's all over. The poem. Do we have a sense that anything's going to change here? Good man, Joe, said Mr. O'Connor, taking out his cigarette paper and pouch. The better to hide his emotion. Remember at the beginning, he's doing the paper and the cigarettes. And he's going to go back to that because he wants to hide. Emotion is bad. Well, maybe emotion is what's needed. Maybe one of the big problems in this post-Parnell world is the lack of emotion. Again, go back to the 17-year-old boy after he drinks the beer, wipes his mouth, is asleep, or mumbles something go out. There's the most passion we see. We don't even get the reading of the poem in any kind of real passion. Hesitated, then amid the silence, he took off his hat, laid it on the table, and stood up. He seemed to be rehearsing the piece in his mind. It's not a spontaneous. After a rather long pause, he announced, reciting it. It's so passionate. There's extraordinary passion in the poem, but we don't get the sense that Hines is delivering it with passion. Silence, then a burst of clapping. There's a moment. The applause continued for a little time. That's a little spark. You get the sense that the flames in the fireplace came up a bit there. The applause continued for a little time. When it had ceased, all the auditors drank from their bottles in silence. And then, puck, another beer bottle opens. Any kind of hope we sense, it's when Hines doesn't go for the invitation to drink the beer, symbolically representing this type of lethargy. This is what's important. Drinking beer, not a cause, not passion, not purpose. All right. So we can talk a little bit more about Ivy Day in the committee room in our next class. We'll also be looking at all the stories you're responsible for if you have questions. And we'll do a brief review, but the majority of our time in class, next class, will be spent on me going over specific elements of the academic essay, the format, what's expected, 5-paragraph, etc., thesis statement. So we'll be spending the majority of the class going over that so that you will be well informed as to what the expectations will be for the midterm exam, which is coming up. Okay, we will see you in class.